The Galaxy Council struck a human diplomat never realized doom was. Already in the room 6 months had passed since the fall of the Velthri Empire. The galaxy looked very different now. The great silver towers on the Velthri homeworld still stood, but the flags flying above them had changed. The criminal leadership had been tried and sentenced. The military had been dismantled. The species that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years was now just another member of the galactic community. Humbled and struggling to rebuild its reputation, the Outer Rim territories were free for the first time in centuries. Slaves had returned to their home worlds. Illegal mining operations had been shut down. New governments were forming, fragile but hopeful. Supported by a coalition of species that had once been too afraid to speak. Carol Vance stood in the newly renovated council chamber, watching delegates arrive for the morning session. Her face had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar that she had chosen to keep. Some had offered to remove it, but she had refused. It was a reminder, she said. A reminder of what had been sacrificed and what had been gained. She no longer served as a trade ambassador. After the Velthri crisis, the council had created a new position specifically for her. She was now the director of council ethics enforcement, responsible for investigating abuses of power and ensuring that no species could ever build a criminal empire under the council's nose again. It was a job she had not wanted, but one she had accepted because it needed to be done. Nathan's fleet had returned to Earth months ago. Their mission was complete, but human observers now served openly throughout the galaxy, no longer hiding in the shadows. They worked alongside other species, sharing information, building relationships, proving that humanity was not interested in replacing one empire with another. The morning session began with routine business: trade agreements, border disputes, resource allocation, the normal work of governing a galaxy. Carol listened and voted and participated, but her mind kept drifting to a conversation she had scheduled for later that day. After the session ended, she walked to a small meeting room where a young delegate was waiting. His name was Tarak, and he represented a species called the Venathi. They had been admitted to the council just 2 weeks ago, one of 11 new species that had applied for membership since the Velthri fell. Tarak rose as Carol entered. He was small by galactic standards, with blue skin and large dark eyes that showed both nervousness and curiosity. "Director Vance," he said, "thank you for meeting with me." Carol smiled and gestured for him to sit. "Please, call me Carol, and there is no need to thank me. I always have time for new members of our community." They sat across from each other at a simple table. Tarak fidgeted with his robes, clearly working up the courage to ask something important. "I have been studying what happened with the Velthri," he said finally. "Everyone in the galaxy has. But there is something I do not understand." "Go on," Carol encouraged. "Your species had the power to destroy them," Tarak said. "After High Speaker Zorath struck you, after you revealed their crimes, your fleet could have attacked. You could have conquered their territory, seized their resources, taken their place as the dominant power in the galaxy." He paused. "Why did you not do this?" Carol considered the question carefully. It was a fair one. Many species had expected exactly that outcome. Some had even offered to support human conquest, hoping to gain favor with what they assumed would be the new rulers of the stars. "Let me tell you something about humans," Carol said. "We have a very long history on our planet. Thousands of years of building civilizations and watching them fall. We have made every mistake a species can make. We have conquered and been conquered. We have destroyed and been destroyed. We have learned, through painful experience, what works and what does not." She leaned forward slightly. "Destruction is easy. Any species with sufficient weapons can destroy. It takes no wisdom, no creativity, no vision. You simply aim your guns and fire. But building something better, something lasting, something that improves the lives of everyone it touches, that is hard. That requires patience and sacrifice and the willingness to work with others, even when it would be easier to dominate them. Torak listened intently. So you chose the harder path. We chose the path that leads somewhere worth going, Carol corrected. If we had conquered the Velthari, we would have become them. We would have been the new empire, feared and hated, constantly watching for the next challenger. We would have spent our future fighting to maintain power instead of using that power to do good. She gestured toward the window, where ships from dozens of species could be seen moving through the station's traffic lanes. Look at what exists now. A coalition of species working together. Trade flowing freely through territories that were once closed. New members joining the council every month. This is not a human empire. This is something far more valuable. This is a community. Torak was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Were you afraid? When Zorath struck you? When you did not know if your plan would work?" Carol touched the faint scar on her cheek. "Yes, I was afraid. But fear is not the same as weakness. Fear tells us that something matters, that we have something worth protecting. The question is what we do with that fear. And what did you do?" Carol smiled. "I used it. I reminded myself what I was fighting for. Not just for humans, but for every species that had ever been bullied by someone stronger. For every voice that had been silenced. For every person who had been told they did not matter." She paused. "I let my fear become my fuel." Torak nodded slowly. "I think I understand." "Thank you, Carol." "Welcome to the council, Torak," Carol said. "I look forward to seeing what your species will contribute." After he left, Carol remained in the meeting room for a while, looking out at the stars. She thought about the journey that had brought humanity to this moment. The centuries of struggle on Earth. The first tentative steps into space. The fear of discovering they were not alone. The determination to survive in a galaxy that did not care about them. And now, here they were. Not conquerors. Not rulers. Just partners in an ongoing story that was far from finished. A message appeared on her tablet. It was from Nathan, back on Earth. "Proud of you," it read. "As always." Carol smiled and typed a quick reply. "Come visit soon." There was still a lot of work to do. She put down the tablet and walked back toward the council chamber. Another session was starting. Another chance to build something better. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely. And humanity, once dismissed as a minor species from a backwater planet, was right where it belonged. Not at the top, looking down, but in the middle, working alongside everyone else, building a future worth having. That was the human way. That was always the human way. The Galaxy Council struck a human diplomat never realized doom was already in the room. The Velthari delegation tried to run. Within hours of Carol's revelation, they had gathered their belongings and rushed toward their ships, hoping to escape before the council could act. They would return to Velthari space, regroup their forces, and prepare for whatever came next. The Empire had survived challenges before. It would survive this one too. That was their plan. At least when they reached the docking bay, they found their path blocked by station security officers. Behind the officers stood Grace Kim, Carol's security chief, holding a data tablet with a very long list of names. By order of the Galactic Council, Grace announced, "All members of the Velthari delegation are to remain on Meridian Prime pending investigation. Your ships have been impounded. Your communications have been restricted. Any attempt to leave will be considered an admission of guilt." The lead Velthari commander stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon. "You cannot hold us here. We are protected by diplomatic immunity." Grace did not flinch. Diplomatic immunity does not apply to war crimes. And as of 30 minutes ago, the Council has suspended Velthari diplomatic status pending review of the evidence. The commander looked past her toward the windows. Through the thick glass, he could see space, and in that space, he could see ships. Human ships. During the 3 days of silence, while the Velthari had been congratulating themselves on their victory, Admiral Vance had quietly repositioned his entire battle group. The human vessels now occupied strategic positions throughout the sector, not threatening, not aggressive, but undeniably present. "Your fleet," the commander said slowly. "It was not here for a goodwill visit." Grace allowed herself a small smile. "It was exactly what we said it was. A goodwill visit. We simply had a very specific definition of goodwill in mind." The Velthari delegation was escorted to secure quarters. Their weapons were confiscated. Their personal guards, many of whom were named in the evidence as having participated in crimes, were arrested on individual charges. By nightfall, the most powerful delegation on Meridian Prime had been reduced to prisoners waiting for judgment. Meanwhile, the Council worked through the night reviewing the human evidence. Independent experts verified each document. Witnesses from the Outer Rim species came forward to confirm stories of abuse and exploitation. The scope of Velthari crimes grew larger with each passing hour. Admiral Nathan Vance watched the proceedings from the USS Perseverance, finally allowing himself to feel some satisfaction. His wife joined him on the observation deck, her bruise now more yellow than purple. "It worked," Carol said quietly. Nathan nodded. "It worked. But we are not finished yet." "I know." Carol looked out at the stars. "The Velthari will try to retaliate. Their fleet is still the largest in the galaxy. When word reaches their homeworld, they will have to respond." "They will," Nathan agreed. "But by then, it will be too late. The coalition is already forming." He was right. Across the station, minor species that had suffered under Velthari dominance were gathering together. The Crethini, the Mordith, the dozen others who had lived in fear for centuries were suddenly finding their voices. They had seen what humanity had done. They had seen that the Velthari could be challenged. And they wanted to be part of whatever came next. The next morning, Zorath was brought to the council chamber in restraints. The High Speaker, who had stood so proudly just days before, now shuffled forward like a broken man. His silver skin had gone pale. His eyes were hollow with exhaustion and fear. Nathan stood before him, wearing his full admiral's uniform for the first time since arriving at the station. The other delegates watched in silence. "High Speaker Zorath," Nathan began, "I want to explain something to you. Something about humanity that you clearly did not understand." Zorath looked up at him with hatred. "You have destroyed everything. My empire, my people, our legacy of 10,000 years. Nathan shook his head. "No, you destroyed it. We simply provided the consequences." He began to walk slowly around Zorath, speaking not just to him but to the entire chamber. "On Earth, we have a concept called measured response. It means that we do not react immediately to every provocation. We do not strike back the moment we are struck. Instead, we wait. We plan. We ensure that when we do respond, our response is so complete, so overwhelming, that no one ever considers striking us again." Nathan stopped in front of Zorath and met his eyes. "You could have ignored my wife's proposal. You could have debated her in council, used your influence to block her through proper channels. You would have won. We did not have the votes to pass that trade resolution." Zorath stared at him. "Then why did she present it?" "Because we wanted to see what you would do," Nathan said simply. "We knew about your crimes. We had the evidence. But we needed the galaxy to see who really were. We needed you to show your true nature in front of everyone." He paused. "And you did exactly what we expected." Zorath's face twisted with fury and shame. You used your own wife as bait? Carol stepped forward, standing beside her husband. I volunteered. Someone had to take the first blow. Someone had to show the galaxy that the Valkyrie were not the civilized leaders they pretended to be. She touched her fading bruise. This was a small price to pay for the freedom of millions. Zorath looked between them, finally beginning to understand the depth of his mistake. He had not just struck a diplomat. He had struck a carefully prepared trap, and he had sprung it perfectly. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Nathan turned to address the full council. Now, the Valkyrie Empire faces justice. Their crimes will be tried before a galactic tribunal. Their victims will receive compensation. Their conquered territories will be freed. He paused. And the galaxy will learn that no species, no matter how old or powerful, is above the law. The council voted unanimously to proceed with the tribunal. As Zorath was led away, he passed Carol one final time. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her calm, steady gaze said everything. The doom that had been in the room all along was not weapons or warships. It was patience. It was planning. It was the quiet determination of a species that had learned, through countless generations of struggle, how to win wars without firing a single shot. The Galaxy Council struck a human diplomat, never realized doom was already in the room. 3 days passed without incident. The council resumed its normal business. Zorath continued his efforts to block human expansion, and many delegates supported him. Carol attended each session, her bruise fading slowly from purple to yellow, a constant reminder of what had happened. She said nothing about the assault. She filed no complaints. She simply watched and listened and waited. The other species began to relax. Perhaps the humans really had decided to accept their place in the galactic order. Perhaps they understood that fighting the Valkyrie was pointless. The incident became just another story, another example of elder species keeping young upstarts in their place. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Carol stood before the council and requested permission to address all assembled delegates on a matter of urgent importance. The Arbiter granted her request, and the chamber fell silent as she activated her display. Distinguished delegates, Carol began. 3 days ago, High Speaker Zorath struck me in this very chamber. I have said nothing about that incident until now. Some of you may have wondered why. Today, I will explain. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the central display lit up with documents, images, and video recordings. The data scrolled past too quickly to read, but the volume was staggering. Thousands of files. Tens of thousands. The collected evidence of decades of investigation. What you see before you is proof that the Valkyrie Empire has been violating 17 different council treaties. Carol said. These violations include illegal weapons development in the Corset system, slave labor operations in the Outer Rim territories, and the assassination of delegates from 3 minor species over the past century. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions and accusations. Zorath rose to his feet, his silver face flushing with rage. This is an outrage. These are fabricated lies designed to distract from human inadequacy. Carol ignored him. The evidence has been compiled by human intelligence operatives who have been embedded in Valkyrie space for the past 40 years. Long before we officially achieved faster than light travel, we were watching. We were learning. We were waiting. The noise died away as the implications sank in. 40 years. Humanity had only been a recognized species in the galactic community for 15 years. That meant they had been conducting intelligence operations for decades before anyone knew they existed. That meant every assumption about human capabilities had been wrong. Carol continued, her voice calm and steady. We had originally intended to share this information through proper diplomatic channels. We planned to work with the Council, to present our evidence gradually, to allow for a measured response. But 3 days ago, High Speaker Zorath demonstrated that the Velthari do not operate within civilized norms. She touched a bruised cheek. This mark on my face is proof that the Velthari believe they can abuse those they consider lesser species without consequence. They believe that power gives them the right to strike anyone who challenges them. We disagree. Carol stepped back and the display zoomed in on specific documents. Evidence of weapons factories hidden in asteroid fields. Records of slaves transported from conquered worlds. Communications ordering the deaths of delegates who asked too many questions. Everything you see here has been verified by independent sources, Carol said. We have shared copies with every delegation represented in this chamber. We have also sent copies to the news networks of 32 species. As of this moment, the entire galaxy knows what the Velthari have done. Zorath's face had gone from rage to shock to something that looked very much like fear. He looked around the chamber at the other delegates. Species that had supported him yesterday were now staring at him with disgust. Species that had feared the Velthari were looking at the evidence with growing anger. You cannot do this, Zorath said, his voice barely above a whisper. You are a minor species. You have no authority to investigate a power like the Velthari. Carol smiled, and for the first time there was no warmth in it. You are correct, High Speaker. We had no authority. We also had no power, no allies, and no protection under galactic law. We were alone in a galaxy that did not care if we lived or died. So we did what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We adapted. We planned. We prepared. She walked toward Zorath, stopping just a few feet away from him. The chamber was completely silent now. Every delegate was watching, barely breathing. You thought you could strike me because I was weak, Carol said softly. You thought you could abuse the Outer Rim species because no one would stop you. You thought your empire was untouchable because no one had ever challenged it. She paused. You were wrong. Zorath tried to speak, but no words came. His mind was racing, trying to calculate a way out of this disaster. But everywhere he looked, he saw only walls closing in. The evidence was real. The galaxy was watching. His empire was exposed. What do you want? He finally asked. Carol turned away from him and addressed the council. I want justice. One want the Velthari to answer for their crimes before a galactic tribunal. I want the slaves freed and the weapons destroyed. I want the families of the murdered delegates to know the truth about what happened to their loved ones. She paused and looked directly at Zorath. And I want High Speaker Zorath placed under arrest for assault against a diplomatic representative, as well as conspiracy to commit the crimes documented in our evidence. The arbiter spoke for the first time. Ambassador Vance, the evidence you have presented is substantial. This council will convene an emergency session to review these materials and determine appropriate action. High Speaker Zorath, you are hereby confined to your quarters pending investigation. Zorath looked around desperately for support, but found none. Even his own delegation was backing away from him, distancing themselves from the disaster he had created. Guards approached to escort him from the chamber. As he passed Carol, Zorath leaned close and whispered, This is not over. Carol met his eyes without flinching. You are correct. This is just the beginning. She watched him go, then returned to her seat. Around her, delegates were already forming new alliances, already calculating how the fall of the Velthari would reshape galactic politics. The balance of power that had held for 10,000 years was about to change forever, and it had all started with a single slap. The Galaxy Council struck a human diplomat, never realized doom was already in the room. The next morning, the galaxy waited to see what humanity would do. News of the incident had spread across every communication network within hours. Species that had never heard of Earth were suddenly searching for information about the small blue planet and its strange inhabitants. The general consensus among the elder species was that humans would file a formal complaint, perhaps demand an apology, and then quietly accept whatever token gesture the Velthri offered. That was how minor species behaved. That was how the game was played. But when the human response finally came, it confused everyone. Admiral Nathan Vance sent personal invitations to every delegation on Meridian Prime. The invitations were printed on actual paper, a luxury that most species had abandoned thousands of years ago. They were written in elegant script and sealed with wax bearing the emblem of the Human Federation. They requested the honor of each delegation's presence at a formal dinner aboard the USS Perseverance. Hi. Speaker Zorath received his invitation personally, from a human ensign who smiled politely and waited for a response. Zorath stared at the invitation for a long moment, searching for the trap. Surely, this was some form of insult. Surely the humans were mocking him. But the invitation contained no hidden messages, no subtle threats. It was simply a request to share a meal. "Tell your admiral I will consider his invitation," Zorath said dismissively. The ensign nodded. "Of course, High Speaker. The admiral also asked me to mention that Ambassador Vance will be attending. She is very much looking forward to continuing her conversation with you." Zorath felt a chill run down his spine, though he could not explain why. There was something in the ensign's tone, something in that polite smile, that made him deeply uncomfortable. He dismissed the feeling as paranoia. Humans were primitives. They could not possibly threaten him. That evening, 43 delegations arrived at the USS Perseverance. The human ship was large by galactic standards, a sleek vessel designed for both combat and diplomacy. The formal dining room had been transformed into a showcase of human culture. Paintings hung on the walls depicting scenes from Earth's history. Music played softly in the background, a gentle melody from something humans called an orchestra. Long tables were covered with white cloth and set with crystal glasses and silver utensils. Admiral Nathan Vance stood at the entrance, greeting each delegation personally. He was tall for a human, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years of experience. He shook hands with some species, bowed to others, and made each guest feel genuinely welcome. There was no trace of anger in his manner, no hint of resentment. He was the perfect host. When Zorath arrived, Nathan greeted him with the same warmth he had shown everyone else. "High Speaker, thank you for honoring us with your presence. Please, come in. My wife has been eager to see you." Carol Vance stood near the center of the room, speaking with a delegation from the Crethany. The bruise on her face was dark purple now, impossible to ignore. She had refused offers from alien physicians to heal the wound instantly. She had insisted on letting it heal naturally, at the slow pace that human bodies recovered. Every delegate who looked at her saw that bruise. Every delegate was reminded of what Zorath had done. When Carol saw Zorath enter, she excused herself from her conversation and walked toward him. The room grew quiet. Every eye watched as the human woman approached the man who had struck her. "High Speaker Zorath," Carol said, her voice pleasant and calm. "I am so glad you could join us. Please, let me show you to your seat. We have prepared some delicacies from Earth that I think you will find interesting." Zorath searched her face for any sign of anger or resentment. He found none. She was gracious and polite, treating him as an honored guest rather than an enemy. It was infuriating. He had expected fury. He had prepared for threats. He had no idea how to respond to kindness. "Ambassador," Zorath said carefully, "about yesterday. Perhaps my actions were somewhat hasty." Carol smiled. "Please, let us not speak of such things tonight. Tonight is for friendship and good food. There will be time for other matters later." She led him to a seat at the head table. directly across from Admiral Vance. Throughout the dinner, Nathan engaged the delegates in conversation about everything except the incident. He asked about their homeworlds, their cultures, their dreams for the future. He told stories about Earth, about human history, about the strange journey that had brought his species to the stars. The food was remarkable. Dishes from every region of Earth were served, each one prepared with care and presented with artistry. The delegates tasted flavors they had never experienced before. They drank wines that had been aging in cellars for decades. They listened to music that stirred emotions they could not name. Zorath barely touched his food. He watched Nathan and Carol throughout the evening, waiting for the mask to slip, waiting for the trap to spring. But it never did. The humans remained friendly and welcoming until the last guest departed. Later that night, after the dining room had been cleared and the ship had grown quiet, intelligence officers from a dozen species sent reports to their governments. They analyzed every word Nathan had spoken, every gesture Carol had made, every subtle detail of the evening. The Mortith intelligence chief wrote that humans were clearly too primitive to understand the insult they had received. The Crethany spymaster suggested that humans were simply too weak to respond and were trying to salvage their dignity through hospitality. The Velthari intelligence officer, however, wrote something different. He wrote that he had never seen anything so terrifying in his 300 years of service. "They are not forgiving us," he wrote. "They are not backing down. They are simply waiting. And I cannot determine what they are waiting for. Whatever the humans are planning, we have badly underestimated them. I recommend we prepare for the worst." Zorath read the report and dismissed it as cowardice. He had struck a human, and nothing had happened. He had proven that humanity was weak, that they could be pushed aside like any other minor species. Tomorrow he would return to the council and finish what he had started. He would block human expansion and secure Velthari, dominance of the Outer Rim for another 1,000 years. Zora slept peacefully that night, confident in his victory. 3 days later, he would wish he had listened to his intelligence officer. 3 days later, he would understand exactly what the humans had been waiting for. But by then, it would be far too late. The Galaxy Council struck a human diplomat never realized doom was already in the room. Ambassador Carol Vance stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of recycled station air. Meridian Prime was the largest neutral station in the galaxy, a massive structure floating in the space between empires where species came to talk instead of fight. She had been here 6 times before, but today felt different. Today the Velthari were waiting for her, and the Velthari never waited for anyone they considered beneath them. Carol walked through the gleaming corridors, with her small team behind her. Her assistant, a young man named Peter Walsh, carried the data tablets containing their trade proposals. Her security officer, a quiet woman named Grace Kim, watched every shadow and doorway with trained eyes. They were a small delegation compared to other species, but humans had learned long ago that quality mattered more than quantity. The council chambers were enormous. Hundreds of seats rose in circular tiers around a central speaking platform. Representatives from 47 species filled those seats, their bodies ranging from the insectoid Crethany to the towering stone-like Mortith. Carol had studied each species during her years of training. She knew their customs, their histories, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The Velthari delegation sat in the upper tiers, their silver skin catching the light. They were a proud species, ancient and powerful, and they had dominated galactic politics for over 10,000 years. Their leader, High Speaker Zorath, watched Carol enter with eyes that held nothing but contempt. To him, humans were insects that had somehow learned to build starships. A curiosity at best. A nuisance at worst, thought Carol took her place at the speaking platform and waited for the council to recognize her. The chamber fell silent as the arbiter, an ancient artificial intelligence that had moderated council proceedings for millennia, announced the session. The council recognizes Ambassador Carol Vance of the Human Federation, the arbiter said. You may present your proposal regarding trade routes in the Outer Rim territories. Carol activated her display and began her presentation. She spoke clearly and simply, laying out humanity's case for establishing trade routes through regions that had been neglected by the major powers. Her arguments were logical, supported by data, and most importantly, completely within galactic law. She watched Zorath's expression change as she spoke. The Valkyrie had been exploiting those same regions for centuries, using them as sources of cheap labor and resources. They had kept their activities hidden from the council, relying on the fact that no one cared enough to investigate a few backwater systems. But Carol's proposal would bring attention to those regions. It would bring oversight, and that was something the Valkyrie could not allow. Ambassador Vance, Zorath interrupted, rising from his seat. These territories you speak of fall under Valkyrie protection. We have maintained order there for generations. Your proposal is an insult to our sovereignty. Carol remained calm. With respect, High Speaker, these territories are designated as open space under Council Charter 17. They have never been formally claimed by any species. I have the documentation here if you wish to review it. Zorath descended from his seat, his silver robes flowing behind him. The other delegates watched in silence. It was unusual for a High Speaker to leave his position during a session. It was even more unusual for him to approach another delegate on the speaking platform. You are a child, Zorath said, his voice dripping with disdain. Your species crawled out of the mud on your little planet only moments ago by galactic standards. You have no right to lecture us about law and territory. Carol held her ground. The law applies equally to all species, High Speaker. That is the foundation of this council. The next few seconds happened very quickly. Carol saw the flash of anger in Zorath's eyes. She saw his arm rise. She heard gasps from the assembled delegates. And then she felt the impact of his hand against her face. A blow so hard that it knocked her off her feet and sent her crashing to the floor. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in their native languages. The arbiter called for order. Carol's security officer, Grace, had her weapon drawn before Carol even hit the ground. But Carol raised her hand to stop her from doing anything rash. Stand down, Carol said, her voice steady despite the pain spreading across her face. We are diplomats. We will handle this as diplomats. Zorath stood over her, his expression showing no regret. Learn your place, human. This council belongs to the elder species. You are here only because we allow it. Carol rose slowly to her feet. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. A bruise was already forming on her cheek. She looked at Zorath with an expression that many would later describe as strangely calm, almost peaceful. This session is concluded, Carol said. I will return tomorrow to continue my presentation. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her team following close behind. The delegates watched her go, some with sympathy, some with confusion, and some with quiet admiration. No one had ever seen a species respond to such an insult with such composure. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly have guessed, was that Carol's personal recorder had been transmitting everything to her husband's ship. Admiral Nathan Vance commanded the human battle group currently docked at Meridian Prime. Officially, they were there for a goodwill visit, a chance to show off humanity's growing fleet to potential allies. Unofficially, Nathan had positioned his ships there specifically to support his wife's diplomatic mission. Nathan sat in his command, chair aboard the USS Perseverance, watching the footage from Carol's recorder. His first officer, Commander Lisa Park, stood beside him, her face pale with shock. Sir, Lisa said quietly, what are your orders? Nathan did not answer immediately. He watched the footage again, watched his wife fall to the ground, watched the blood on her face. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. But when he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. "Contact the other ships in our battle group," Nathan said. "Tell them to maintain their positions. No aggressive actions. No communications with the station except through official channels." Lisa hesitated. "Sir, surely we should respond to this. The Velthari have just assaulted a human ambassador. That's an act of war by any definition." Nathan finally looked away from the screen. His eyes were cold, but there was something behind that coldness that made Lisa step back. It was not anger. Anger was hot and reckless. What she saw in the Admiral's eyes was something far more dangerous. It was patience. It was calculation. It was the look of a man who was already seeing 10 moves ahead. "The Velthari expect us to react," Nathan said. "They expect us to shout and threaten and demand satisfaction. They have dealt with angry species before. They know how to handle anger." He paused, and a small smile crossed his face. "They have never dealt with us." Nathan stood and straightened his uniform. "Prepare the formal dining room. We are going to invite the entire council delegation to dinner tomorrow evening, including High Speaker Zorth." Lisa stared at him. "Sir, you heard me, Commander. Full formal dinner. The best food, the best wine, the best hospitality humanity can offer." Nathan walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. "And make sure my wife has access to whatever medical care she needs. She took that blow like a soldier. I intend to make sure her sacrifice was not wasted." The door closed behind him, leaving Lisa alone with the frozen image of Carol's bloodied face on the screen. She did not understand what the Admiral was planning, but she knew the Velthari had made a terrible mistake.